Hey everyone, this is Devin Francis, aka Leonard Meltzner,
Sup, Victoria here.
and you're watching The Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast. We are coming to you with episode 22 this week, hitting double identical digits, which are divisible by 2 that
And
produce a
11.
whole number. Pretty exciting things, and it is now December. In truth, it's actually now almost February 2014, but when this episode was supposed to be filmed, it is now December. So we are going to be starting our Christmas reviews. Now, as you guys know, we normally alternate between every 2 weeks. We do a review of 2 episodes, and for this December, what we're going to be doing is having Christmas episodes throughout, but because, as you saw during our Album 57 reviews, if we have 3 episodes being reviewed together, then we do 1 episode on the one before or after that, so it balances out to an even total number of episodes. And so because we're going to be doing a 3-parter of Christmas episodes 2 weeks from now, and I'm sure you guys know which one I'm talking about, this week we're only doing 1 single episode to balance that out, and that episode is...
Oh, do you want me to say it?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. A Christmas Conundrum.
Yay! Yes. Well, I don't know if I call it my favorite Christmas episode altogether. It is my favorite comedy Christmas episode, and possibly my favorite comedy episode overall.
Apologies to people who just yawned because of Devin's foolishness.
Yes, I apologize. So I'm going to be pretty fanboyish over this episode because I really like A Christmas Conundrum for a number of different reasons, and we're going to look at why.
And I respect you for your reasoning.
Yes. I found out when we did the first take for this episode that Victoria, in fact, did not like this episode very much in general. Which I never found out about until we were
It's not that I didn't like it, it's just the first time I ever heard it because me and Devin started Odyssey a really long time ago. First time I heard it, I did not like it, but this was like 5 years ago.
That we first got Album 45.
What?
I mean, it was a while ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It was like 4 years or something.
It wasn't 4 years, it was more than that.
But not much, probably.
It was like 6 years ago.
Actually, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Oh, so I would have been 10. So you can't blame me for my opinions, because...
Okay. Touche. Yeah. All right, let's get right into it then with episode 581, A Christmas Conundrum, written by the fabulous Kathy Buchanan, or Kathy Weringer, whichever name you prefer.
The person who invented Mitch.
Yes.
Yes.
But Kathy Buchanan, when she wrote this episode, and as she is now, because that's her married name. So, start off, I really like this episode a lot. Kathy's writing, just to give a quick overview of the points in this episode, which I adore so much, the characterization and the way each of the characters are portrayed to fit the trope that this episode was trying to do, how it took their characters and wrote them really well and was still able to get them to, plausibly fit into this story structure that's kind of a semi-cliche set one already.
Well, they're still remaining in character.
Yes. The multiple times we have multiple conversations running over each other that weave together really well. Lots and lots of really funny lines. And on top of that, funny lines that, make a lot of reference overall to the show, that kind of like fan laughy things that we find funny, kind of inside fandom jokes. Yes, Laffy the Wonder Dog.
Okay.
Tuesday nights at 7.
I know, Devin.
Okay, so to get into specifics, looking at individual lines as we come into the episode, the line about how rush hour in Odyssey the line about how rush hour in Odyssey consists of a truck, a bike, and a dog on a limp, I've always found a really funny episode because I come from a very small town. Victoria does too. In fact, we come from the same small town. And when I say a small town, I don't mean the size of Odyssey. I mean it's about an eighth of the size of Odyssey. So I really appreciate this line, even if it is exaggerated. Connie, in this scene, says that she doesn't have a resume, which is a very weird line, and that's something that's always stuck out very much to me as an odd thing in my head. Assuming that she never gave Whit one to keep on file originally when she first started working on Whit's End, which is entirely plausible, I would admit, considering the nature of her job.
Starting to work there.
Yeah, considering the nature of her job interview, I can see how that would happen, but still, you know, she's graduated from high school, and she was valedictorian, so she did pretty good in it. And I don't know about how every school in the States works, but I had to make at least 2 or 3 or 4 resumes during high school for various computer planning for the future, grad classes, things like that. So
yeah, I did too. It's kind of a necessity at our school.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe it's different in the American school system.
Also,
no clue.
When she's in, like, what are you going to do with your life, she applies for a couple jobs there. Like, I highly doubt Harlow, in the way that she started working for him, he would have got her to make up a resume, but...
For working at Osborne's, I'm sure that she would have had to have one. Yeah, it sounded kind of like upper class. That's a good point.
So...
Yeah. Well, it has a perfume counter, after all. Yeah. Yes, that's a good point, Victoria.
But,
to come back... Sorry, what were you going to say?
Know. That's all I was going to say.
Okay. Coming back to what I was saying earlier about overlapping conversations, I love Connie and Eugene's background banter in one of the opening scenes here, talking about Connie's perpetual tardiness. And Connie, a couple times, to be specific, very on in Adventures in Odyssey, she mentions the fact that she is always, always late for everything. Specifically, she says it to Tom when he's behind the counter, and she thinks that he's Whit at the beginning of Recollections, and she says it to Whit when she meets him at Stonebridge in the Nemesis Part 2. Basically, it's been a really long time since this joke has been brought up, since album 5, and this is album 45. It's a very large difference.
Well, there's been, like, lots of times in between that. Like, in Father's Day, they mention it, like, when Bill's late to meet Connie in June... he's just like, sorry, I'm late, and June's like, yeah, so that's who she gets it from and stuff.
Well, thank you for deflating my point, Victoria.
You're welcome.
But Connie didn't point it out, so I'm still sort of right on the technicality. Anyways, it's an in-joke that I liked so much from this episode that in 2008, for those of you who remember back when album 51 was going to come out, as we were nearing the end of the second hiatus, they had a contest for the Inspiration Station where you could send in an audio clip in character someone from the town of Odyssey saying how Connie has inspired you over her time at Whit's End. And, you know, the people who made it, they made it into the episode. And then there were people like me who kind of wasted their opportunity to be on the show by sending in sarcastic answers. And I said something along the lines of, ever since I started working at Pete's Gas and Chow, that I've never been late for work because I've been so inspired by the fact that every time Connie comes into Whit's End, she's talking about how she is always late.
Yeah, the reason you didn't get in is that doesn't really match with the theme of what they were trying to do.
Yeah, I know. And the funny thing, though, is even though I didn't get into the episode, which I kind of expected, because, you know, it was kind of snarky and that's not what they were going for, I did actually make it into the following episode of the official podcast, where they had a compilation clip of a bunch of similar responses people sent in.
The best one was that kid, and he was talking about how he always eats ice cream, so to check it for freezer burns like
that he learned from Connie. Yes, that was the best one. But yeah, mine was also in there. So I did make it into the official podcast still. Not on Odyssey, but, you know, it's a decent second place.
What about this, Devin? This podcast?
Sorry?
What about the podcast?
Yeah, this podcast. Nobody watches this podcast.
This old thing. We're just talking to dust.
Nobody actually watches our podcast. Actually, exciting news. On YouTube, the total video views for our channel, I think, is coming quite close, up to 2,000 now.
Wow.
Which is quite exciting. I think it's like 1,800 and something last time I checked. So, yeah, that's cool.
Thanks, guys.
It could be 2,000 by the time this video comes out. I don't know. You can
You
go
guys
down,
rock.
click on the channel name right now, and check and see where it's
I
at. You
still
go
can't
click,
point at the camera properly.
go down, and then you click on the About button on the channel, and then it says the total number of views for the channel. I don't know where it's going to be by the time this comes out. Anyways, Eugene talking to Mr. Whittaker in his office. His line about when he asks Whit, or Whit asks if he can ask Eugene a question, Eugene says, "Yes, you may, and you have. However, I shall allow another." And Whit kind of says, "Yeah." And I think this is a really great Eugene moment, and not just for, Eugene says something needlessly brainy or complicated, and people are kind of taken aback by it, because, that's kind of old hat by now. Eugene's been around since 1989, right? It's a very long time. Or 1988, sorry, the end of 1988. So, that kind of spiel in general is an old hat trick right now. That's kind of the most stereotypical thing for his character. But what I really like about the way it's put here is it feels like we don't get enough of this specific type of moment with him, because he has plenty of these rants where you get roundabout sentences, but it's really nice when people aren't like all taken aback and, "Oh, Eugene, you're so wordy," and, "Oh, you need to be normal," and stuff, but they just kind of brush it off as the fact that it's Eugene. Because
it's even funnier the fact that Whit is the one who goes like, Yeah. Like if it was Bernard or Tom or Connie, we'd just be like, haha, but since it's Whit, it's like way funnier.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that so often characters will make this big federal case out of translating what Eugene says, and while that's funny at first and it's in character, for a certain amount of time on the show, it really doesn't make sense anymore because they've known Eugene for so long. They expect that from him, and when he says that, they're going to accept it and just kind of take it in stride because that's who it is, and they've known him for decades now. Eugene is mellifluous with his words, and his friends accept that about him, except for Tom, Bernard, and sometimes Connie. But you get the point. The fact that Whit wasn't like, "Oh, Eugene," as so characters are so often, fits a lot more with the way the characters have developed than the way I think it's written a lot of the time. So that's something I really appreciate and fits into what I was saying about good characterization in here. Following up on that conversation, Eugene's line about how he'll have to tell Whit one day about the spy work that he did in Morocco. I really love the fact that we still get mentions to Eugene and Katrina's travels ever since they returned, because we got a bunch in For Better or For Worse, and they were here, of course, and obviously there's Prisoners of Fear, which is an amazing three-parter, and it's so good, and the music is the best of any episode on the entire show, but I digress on that point. The point is, it would be really interesting if we ever heard more elaboration on Eugene and Katrina's secret travels evading teams of assassins around the world. But considering that Hand Up doesn't exist anymore, I highly doubt that that's going to happen.
Gee, Jeff, we really wish that we had some sort of philanthropic organization to help you, but we don't. So
I don't know, some sort of philanthropic loving enterprises of altruistic services for everyone. Oh, goodness.
If only we could offer a hand out to the community.
Yes. If only we could sarsis our manums towards you. That would just be ever so helpful.
But too bad that isn't a thing we can do, isn't it, Jeff?
Nope, it's not like we had an entire three-parter dedicated to the emotional struggles that we were feeling over whether or not we should go to Africa or not, based solely on, whether or not we wanted to leave said theoretical organization behind.
It's a good thing that never happened, or else that would have made that plot point very pointless in the future.
Yes, it would.
Anyway, Jeff, have a nice trip back. We can't help you.
Nope.
Marry Connie.
Did you have any comments on anything up to this point, Victoria?
All the points here. Even though this isn't my favorite episode, as you know, I do really, really like the parts you pointed out. Like the Eugene and Whit thing always makes me laugh, and also pretty much all the parts with Eugene in this episode, I just
It is a very
love.
good Eugene episode.
Like Eugene,
He and Tom are probably the best two in
yeah,
this episode.
Eugene, Connie, and Tom just
Cheddar and
make
toast
this.
and flat tires.
Cheddar is has to be my
we're
favorite
getting there.
Tom moment in all of Odyssey.
That is a perfectly fair statement. All right, to get back to our chronology, considering how often Whit flies and travels everywhere, I would think that an altimeter would actually be a very interesting thing to have on a watch. Or at least I thought that for a couple seconds as I was typing that out in my notes. And then I realized that if you were flying, you'd be in an airplane cabin, which is pressurized to approximately surface air pressure, so an altimeter would actually be really useless. But it would be really cool to have, regardless, on your watch. And I would actually also love to see a watch with a shoehorn. That would be pretty fascinating
How would that even
technology.
work?
Well, that's why it would be interesting to see. And I guess if you were flying in a plane with an open cockpit, like a little biplane or something like that, then an altimeter would be useful. Except the air pressure probably be messed up by all the air currents blowing in your face or whatever, but it's not important. Moving on to my favorite scene in this entire episode, as we begin, as Tom and Connie are talking about toast, a delightful topic. This episode has so many perfect one-liners that it just blows my mind how well they're packed into such a small space. It has to be my favorite Kathy Buchanan episode, although, like I said earlier, considering it's basically tied for my #1 episode ever overall, I would think that would be pretty obvious. The writing in this episode is fantastic, and it's not just the humor. I love humor, but humor doesn't make a story in and of itself. The story is constructed so well and fluidly, and it's not just that, because the plot itself is fairly simple, and it's a pretty classic idea. It's not something really new or mind-blowing, but it plays off of all of the characters so well. If you did this, say, in a movie, I mean, assuming that you could fill an entire movie with this kind of plot, my point is, if you went into this plot with characters that you knew nothing about and you had to build the characters around this plot, it would be pretty mundane. It wouldn't be bad, but it would just be absolutely just mediocre, average, nothing really interesting about it. The great thing is that we're taking this plot here, which is kind of set, we can figure out how it's going to work out in our minds, and it takes characters that we already know so much about, and they all have really different characteristics and different ways that they interact with every single other character, and they're able to fit into this structure. And it's not like you can easily just kind of slap them in and expect them to be able to interact properly to fill this thing, because they're all different. And the fact that Kathy was able to work on their characteristics such that they would fit into this model while still remaining really true to who they are as characters is really good writing. One perfect example of this, and I'll get into it later, is Whit, and how he was the one who sort of started and ended this cycle, because he is definitely the one person who would never be caught up in the middle of this sort of cycle, but we'll get on to that later as we get to its part in this story. Either way, as I was saying, they're written really well, and so the way this story goes together, it doesn't feel like it's really cliche, at least it doesn't to me. It feels really organic the way it plays off together, because it's really following in so well with who the characters are, and it hits them all dead on the nail. So even without all the great humor, which I love, it's just added bonus on it, this episode is still incredibly written. Cheddar.
Cheddar.
You can talk first, Victoria.
Okay. This scene, this beautifully crafted scene. I might not like this episode as much as others, but this scene, one day I'm going to take my best friend and I'm just going to get her to listen to this scene and see what her reaction is. If she isn't just like, I want to listen to all Odyssey, then I'll make her leave my house. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that to Gabe.
No, you wouldn't.
So this just shows how honest Tom is as a person, how bad it just coming up with things. He is like he's trying. I forgot what I was talking about. No, it's not Tom trying to come up with things, it's Eugene. But Eugene actually, his part, like, that's really sweet. It sounds like he's gonna be like, oh, we were, like, you would think his perfect Christmas would be like, oh, Katrina got me a test tube, and then we weighed sodium chloride together and turned it blue or something. Merry Christmas. Or something. But no, it's actually like, we were snowed in, and then we hung out, and we spent time together, and it's just like, whoa! What did you do to that character who has no emotions back from album 3? You've shaped him into this awesome, awesome husband.
Character development.
Yeah, character development. It's really interesting because...
A single test tube would be a pretty terrible Christmas present, I'm just saying. Like, one test tube. It's pretty weak.
Well, it's better than the crunchy cheese that comes into the episode later.
Touché.
But yeah, it's really interesting to see Eugene's character development. I've always really loved his character development. I think that he has some of the best in the show because, like, long-term character development. Because you go from this character, I'm not sure how, this character who pretty much has no emotions, just thinks of, like, computers. Like, he even mentions that he'd marry a computer later on. And then you take him, he becomes a Christian, and then it's interesting because the whole period of time when he's first married to Katrina, we never get to see that. Like, we get to see all his relationship building with her, but unfortunately, yeah, we never get to see that. So that's why it's all the more like, wow, once they come back, he gets his memories back, and then you see how he acts around her. And it's just like, oh, that's so sweet. It's like when they were dating and things were finally working out, but...
For those little 5-second segments where they weren't in huge relationship
longer amounts
distress.
of time, which is really nice. And it's not super awkward because of other things getting in the way, like what ring they should choose or Brandon and stuff like that.
That's true. You know, just yesterday I was writing up the notes for reviewing the Christmas 3-parter we're going to be doing in 2 weeks.
It's a perfect witness, just so you guys know.
Yeah. And looking at Eugene's relationship with Hezekiah and just thinking about in the long term how much effect Hezekiah had on Eugene's walk of faith moving towards a moment of death. The whatchamacall when Eugene becomes a Christian.
The time has come?
The time has come. I was like, time something. Time
of the doctor.
Yes.
When Eugene becomes a Christian.
Thank you, Victoria.
For those of you who missed that part in the episode.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Must have had my eyes closed. As I was saying, Eugene's relationship with Hezekiah is absolutely adorable, and looking at this kind of mentor relationship that he had with him in the way that he was able to teach Eugene so much for someone who wasn't a Christian then, and how much of a long-term impact it had on the rest of his walk coming up towards album 25 like that is just really cool.
Like,
you know, when you try and forget about the fact that technically speaking Hezekiah is actually a computer program.
Well, still, like, tons of people have been affected majorly by the Imagination Station anyway.
I know.
So,
moving on from Eugene and his wonderfulness as a character, Another thing that this episode does magnificently, as I mentioned earlier, is the integration of multiple simultaneous conversations. And they usually don't last long in their area of overlapping interspersion, but they segue really wonderfully together. And the first time was at the beginning of the episode, where we have Grady and Whit talking about resumes, and then we have Eugene lecturing Connie about tardiness at the same time. And now we have Connie asking Tom about Cheddar while Eugene is sharing what is actually, like Victoria said, a very surprisingly touching moment about him and Katrina. It always warms my heart.
Like, it's probably one of my, even though Katrina isn't in it, and I really love Katrina, but it is probably one of my favorite Eugene-Katrina moments.
Yeah.
If that's possible without her being
really
there.
Nice. Even Connie was surprised at the sentiment expressed.
And Tom was still thinking about his 35-legged dog.
Yeah.
His 35-legged dog.
And from there, Eugene moves into playing covert mode, which he does about as well as Rei Ryugazaki. He's so terrible at being covert, and it's so camp, which makes it absolutely adorable.
Detective
as far as
Ray.
It goes... Sorry?
Detective Ray.
Yes. As far as Eugene's covertness goes, this was actually one of his much better attempts, especially compared to the smoothness of, say, the Buck Oliver DNA lemonade toothpick incident.
Yeah, something must have happened in between then.
And then Tom has to leave the room because his phone rings, and there's something I find immensely amusing about Tom's groovy techno ringtone that he uses. I love the way that Tom then on the phone says, "You're joking," to Connie in reaction to hearing that the Prelude was purchased. Because the way he says it, and it's not just...
great read.
Just those two words, it's not just like being read, and it's not just being read well. It is fantastic. I can't even identify exactly what it is about the inflection that's so good, but the image that it puts in your mind, the look on his face, and it's not something that I can reproduce. But it is just so funny, the combination of disbelief and shock and surprise and just, I'm so done with this, that's being mixed together in all the right proportions together. Just all of the actors are on such top form in this episode in terms of just the one-liners that they deliver. And it just makes me so excited. And then Tom delivers this lovely little line to Connie about how just because he's getting an expensive gift for you doesn't mean that you have to do the same for him. Gee, Tom, that is a really nice thought, and I'm really glad to see that you stuck with your conviction throughout the episode on that point. And we get a little Bart Rathbone as we come through here into the Electric Palace, and even better, we get Tom and Bart together as Bart, spends about 4 seconds being welcoming as a customer comes in before is the, "Welcome to the Electric..." "Oh, it's you, Riley." This exchange...
I'm amazed, by voice actors when they can switch over voices so fast. Like, Jess is another big one when he's arguing with himself and Wooten.
Jess is the best.
Captain, absolutely.
Jess is the best in Hollywood.
I think,
no arguing
this, and of course Tom Vermeer. I think Tom Vermeer would be over this one because it's longer. He has a huge argument with himself and Tom Vermeer, for those of you who haven't seen this episode, where he is running for office against Bart, and then they have to have this, what are they called again?
Debate.
What?
Debate.
Yeah, he has to have a debate against himself and himself.
I don't think you have to explain the whole thing.
So
the point is there's a lot of dialogue between the same actor back and forth, and as Victoria said, Jess is definitely the best at it because he actually will interrupt himself between two different characters in the same take in the studio, which isn't something that anyone else can really top, but still, it's really great, especially because you listen to it and you're like, I miss them both so much. They're both characters who have gone now because Walker isn't with us anymore, and that is very sad. Tom, even in as much flack as people give him for being a bit of a hick, he really should know better that when you're buying presents for a friend in public, you should always be constantly checking over your shoulder for the givee to peep in on you.
Especially in a town as small as Odyssey.
Exactly.
Like in our town, you pretty much have it guaranteed there. I know what it is because they're probably like in the store with you. So
the one store in Castlegar.
yeah, that actually has happened to me a couple times. Like I'm going out to buy someone a present and they're actually in the store. So then I have to somehow make sure they're on the other side of the store, and then it's really awkward if they come out to the checkout when you're there and you're like, "Oh, I'm getting this for someone that isn't you."
I think the most relatable thing is when you're doing Secret Santa gifts and you arrive at the exchange, or at church arriving trying to give, put your secret sister gift on the back table and trying to shield it under your coat so that they won't see you put it there and know who it is. Because,
yeah, but
Secret
the difference
Santa,
is we're
if
the
you're at a
ones who have
meeting
to shield
together,
mom's presents.
Sorry?
We're the ones who have to shield mom's presents for her.
And it's hard, that's my point. At a Secret Santa meeting, if you're all meeting together, chances are that's the day you're going to reveal it. But with Secret Sister gifts, it could be like March, and it's going to be another 9 months before you find out who everyone's secret sister is at church. So you can't find out that early. So it's a very complicated cloak and dagger kind of procedure that I have to orchestrate in order to keep all of these things proper for all of the women of WM. It is a burden which I bear.
No, you don't.
Moving on to what I was talking about earlier with Whit and his characterization in this episode, we finally see the scene between Whit and Tom, and this is possibly my second favorite scene in this episode, and not for the comedy reasons. I really love the way that Whit is so incredibly discomforted about having to talk to Tom about presents just as a topic in general, and how he still gives in to Eugene when Eugene calls upon that favor from him. He doesn't, it's something he really doesn't like to talk about in general, but when he said that he owes someone for something, it's still something that he's willing to overcome to help a friend. And it's a really Whit-like thing in the way that it's portrayed, and I really don't think it's a very easy thing to balance how to go about writing it, these two kind of opposing forces, but I feel that it was done really well here, as I've said before, between doing something he doesn't want to and helping a friend. The fact that he's uncomfortable about people giving him gifts, and this was mentioned in Here Today, Gone Tomorrow by Connie, when they were talking about knowing God, to know God's will, and what would happen for Whit's theoretical birthday party, and Connie talks about how there wouldn't be any gifts because Whit doesn't like getting gifts from people. That makes him feel uncomfortable. And thinking about it as I was writing this down, I was thinking about how this very likely relates to Whit's past, and as we see in the very next episode, which is Silent Night, looking into Whit's past.
Which we are not reviewing, just so you guys know.
Sorry?
Which we are not reviewing, just so you guys know.
No, not yet. Whit talking about, or Whit showing us through his flashbacks, his early days being a father and all of the insecurities that he felt about how he believed he wasn't able to properly provide for his family and wasn't able to be the father and have that prosperity to provide for his kids the way that he wanted to. And I imagine that his discomfort concerning the topic of Christmas presents and gifts in general stems from that in his past, which adds a lot more emotion to the scene, I think, thinking about it in that light. It's really nice, as I was saying, the reason I like this scene so much, to hear Whit and Tom just chat about life, and not just about the Christmas presents, but just in general talk to each other. And we don't get enough of that. We don't get any of that now, because Walker Miston has passed away. But just in general, that is who Tom's character was created to be. He was supposed to be Whit's accountability and Whit's springboard. And as time went on, we see them less and less together, having that kind of interaction, especially through things like Novacom, where it was especially highlighted just how much of a junction there is between them, because Whit was a person who's becoming caught up more and more in the new and the technology and all of the intrigue that comes along with living in Odyssey, whereas Tom is someone who's always trying to keep things more quiet and calm, and he really doesn't like all that excitement and it kind of puts more and more of a disjoint between them as people. And so getting to see them together and just spend time together is really heartwarming, I think. And sadly, on that topic, I was thinking about it, looking through the episodes, and I think that this is the last time that the Timothy Center is ever mentioned in this episode, which is very sad, because always, the episode Always with the shepherds was a couple episodes before this, so I don't think it's ever mentioned again after this point. Any comments, Victoria, before I move into the penultimate scene?
Isn't the Timothy Center mentioned in The Best Small Town?
I don't think so. They mentioned Tom's farm, and him waking up in the morning, feeding Rachel. But they don't talk about the Timothy Center itself, to my remembrance.
Never mind.
Anything else to say about the episode before we get to the gift exchange?
I don't know. Only that that's sad. I never thought about the whole distance between Whit and Tom. I always figured that they'd like hang out a lot off screen and stuff.
They probably do, and I'm just reading too much into things like I normally do. So to move into the climax scene of this episode, I think that the most telling thing about the gift-giving scene in relation to the moral of this episode is the fact that people seem to feel guiltier about the gifts that they skimped on than the amount of annoyance that they have over the failed expectations for the skimping that they received. Now, that is a very complicated sentence, so I'll try and break down that a little. So, I'm not trying to say that nobody felt a little disappointed when they got a small gift from someone, at least for a little while, namely Connie. But it really seems that the emotions that people felt when they received a small gift from someone, which were there, but they were vastly outweighed by the amount of guilt they felt when they realized how they'd skimped on everyone else's gifts because of the way that they had, given such a huge gift to someone just because of what they thought they were going to get in return. And I think that that ties really, really well into what the lesson for the episode here is. Because everyone except for Whit was at fault for basing people's gifts on the gifts that they thought they were going to receive. Whit also gave a huge gift, but he didn't give it because he thought Connie was getting him a big gift. He gave it just because he was choosing to give something nice to Connie, just because he cares about her. And Christmas is not about, basing the size of gifts on the gifts that you think you're going to get back. Sheldon Cooper addresses this very point in The Big Bang Theory very astutely, stating that if the social custom is for someone to give someone else a gift of some specific economic value, and then that someone else is expected to reciprocate with another gift in return of that very same economic value, then what is the point of giving the gifts to each other at all? And I don't think that anybody in this room would have felt guilty at all if they'd given everyone gifts of the same value. And, that's perfectly easy to say and walk away with a lesson just like that, and, that's pretty weak. What I really like about this is the point that even if they had had very unbalanced amounts in the ways that they gave their gifts, for example, Whit giving a car to Connie, even though he combined it with his Christmas bonus, so it wasn't that much bigger than everyone else's, and he gave small gifts to other people, if they'd all been unbalanced like that, but it wasn't due to, they're getting me a big gift, so I have to give them a big gift. It was just due to, you know what, this is what I want to get for this person, so that's what I'm getting them. This is what I want to get for this person, this is what I want to get them. Then they wouldn't have had that guilt racking them in that same way. And I think that's what the point that we need to get here is, and I think that's a little bit of an easy thing to miss here. If they had based it just on the fact that they're friends and it doesn't really matter what they get them, they just want to get them something they like, doesn't matter how much it cost, and you shouldn't be evaluating the friendship into, what kind of gift you're getting, then it wouldn't have caused all of that guilt, and they wouldn't have had this problem that was going on the entire episode. And I think that theme reaches a lot more than the superficial level of what it would have been if it was just, we should all get each other equal gifts. And then to sort of tie into that as we have our final scene, and we kind of remember, oh yeah, there was another subplot in this episode that we all kind of forgot about because it was only mentioned once in the first scene, and that is dear little Grady McKay trying to find a job so that he could get an alarm clock for his mother for Christmas. And I think the way that his story is handled here is really interesting because even though it's a subplot off of the main story in and of itself is formed of a whole bunch of little subplots. There's, Whit connected to Connie, Connie connected to Eugene, and Eugene connected to Tom, and Tom connected back to Whit again. And so normally with that many subthreads going on, you wouldn't have time to throw in another side story with that. If there was, normally what you would see is either it's like the side story tries to get the same size as the entire other one, which is this whole loop, in which case it's going to be way too big and it's just going to be awkward, and all the other subplots in the main ring of gift exchanging aren't going to get enough space. Contrarily, if it got, a size roughly equivalent to each of the individual bits in this cycle of gift exchanging, that it's just not going to work out very well because you're going to be trying to tie it up when it's really not related in the same way that they're all related to each other. So the way that it was bookended onto the episode without getting tied up and subsequently taking away from the main story of the episode, I think is really good. It's not really a side story so much as a forethought and an afterthought on the episode, but that makes perfect sense the way it is, and there's not a lot of stories that you can kind of do that sort of thing. And I would almost call it kind of, daring in the way that it's handled. That might be too strong of a term, but the way that it's used to kind of punctuate what the lesson is instead of adding another point onto what the lesson means or something like that, I think is handled very well. And incidentally, Eugene is a real sweetheart in that scene.
I think we already covered
perfect
a lot
Eugene episode
Eugene
all around.
Sweetheartness. Like, this is... Okay, I don't want to say they do, but Tom and Eugene kind of carry this episode. Like, a teensy bit with, like, their individual character parts. Like, they don't carry this episode. Like, everyone... It's a collective carrying of everyone who's in it. So it's just... No one really carries it, if that makes sense. I don't know. This
doesn't really sound like an episode that you dislike, I have to say. The way you talk.
Because you've been talking the whole episode. I haven't had a chance to.
Oh, well, please. Elucidate.
I was going to talk about the ending first.
Go on, okay.
So,
say what you will.
The reason I really like the ending of this is because it's kind of like, the lesson is there, like, it's a pretty decent lesson. I would say, like, it's pretty strong, but not, like, extremely strongly driven in, with the gift exchange part. And then there's this part with Eugene and Grady at the end. So it's pretty much saying, like, this is what you should do, and then the end is saying, this is how you do it. So, it's like
it's very well put, Victoria.
It's like this nail in the ground, and then it's just like, Eugene just, like,
the nail in the coffin, you mean?
Heck out of that nail, so it's just, like, wedged into your head, so you remember the lesson.
Nail
That's
in
why
the coffin,
I always give my
is
friends presents from the 2-cent bin at the dollar store. No, I'm kidding. I don't do that. But...
Is there anything you wanted to talk about why you dislike the episode? Yet more than just my obsessive perspective on things.
Okay.
We do have to be somewhat objective here, or at least I'd like to think we do.
What do you mean by objective in this context?
I mean, you can't just have my perspective offering one viewpoint. You think something different, so I can't just shut you out. So please tell the world why you think what you think.
First thing I'm going to say is I do not hate this episode. When I was little and it came out, I don't know what it was, but I did not really like Album 45 very much. Like, in general. Like, I didn't like this one. I didn't like Silent Night. I didn't like Prisoners of Fear. Please don't hurt me after this, Devin.
This is literally like one of my favorite albums ever.
Yeah, I know. What else is in Album 45?
Odyssey Sings.
That one by that point, even though we got the album, we'd had it, like that single episode by itself for a really long time, so I was kind of sick of it
were
by
together
then.
in a 2-episode sampler, which we had previously.
Always, I really, really liked that one. For me, nowadays, is kind of harder to listen to because Devin doesn't live here anymore. Like, last time I listened to it, it was a little while before he left, so that was pretty hard.
The Business of Busyness.
That one was okay.
All-Star Witness.
That one I really, really like, and I still do.
Anyway,
so
this isn't a summary of album 45.
Yeah, anyway, so there's just something about the episode, like, when I was little, I did not like giving people things, pretty much at all. Like, I was a pretty selfish kid, I'm not afraid to admit it. Devin's smiling because he knows I'm right.
No,
I used to go to people's houses and, like,
about you. I just think that's funny that
presents.
You said that. I don't have any specific memories that would lean one way or the other in defense or support of that.
So, like, I liked the episode, like, I don't know, there's just something about the format, like, the episode and the characters are great in it, but there's just something, it kind of sounds like a comedy routine kind of episode. And there's always something about that I don't really like this idea that's been, like, played over and over and over in a bunch of comedy kind of skits, but I do really like how they do it in this. Like, they do it well. And this is all from back when I was little. I did not like that kind of comedy thing. I don't mind it as much now. It depends how it's done, at least. And
I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I never really liked the end of the episode with Grady because I was thinking, like, I want Grady's mom to be able to get her present, but Eugene really wanted his present, so why doesn't he just keep it? Like, that was my mindset of my selfish 10-year-old's brain. So now I definitely do not think that anymore. I'm far more giving now, right, Devin?
Yes.
And yeah, so it's one of those episodes where it definitely shows with me that opinions change over time. Like this episode and Silent Night. I disliked Silent Night extremely. Like, this one was like a gem compared to how much I did not like Silent Night. Wow. I like Silent Night now and all the other episodes in album 45, just so you guys know. But yeah, anyway.
So, before we do our final ratings, one more thing to interject. As you guys have noticed in the past 2 review episodes, which we did now, we are providing you with the bonus information from the official guide about these episodes. And for this one, it is, and I quote, "Cutscenes. A short subplot about Tom's 5-legged dog Cheddar was cut from A Christmas Conundrum. Don't ask." Unquote. What could it have been?
I want to know how they could have worked an actual legitimate subplot.
I know.
Like, I like it, the conversation for comedy purposes, because that part is hilarious, but
I feel like it could have gotten kind of not funny if they tried to turn it into an entire subplot.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
it depends what they mean by subplot, though.
It's really funny, but if it's like one of those jokes that runs over and over and over again, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah, don't overplay it or you're going to kill it.
Yeah.
That was probably for the best. As much as I love the Cheddar thing, I think they made the right decision there based on what we can most likely assume about it based on the information provided.
Yeah.
So, final ratings. I think I'll go first. Is that fine with you?
It is fine with me.
I thought it would be. I'm going to give this episode 5 stars out of 5. Surprise, surprise.
Quelle surprise.
Yes, this episode, as I've said, it is a great theme, which, while approximations of the theme are a bit common, the specific one isn't one that specifically is explored very often. The way it's done is with a plot trope which is semi-cliche, but the way it plays off the characters, as I've said, is fantastic for their characterization, and it weaves them together in a way which is creative and works very well for each of the individual characters. It's creative in the way it executes it for each of them. It bookends it very well with Grady's subplot without it becoming too tangled into things in a way that would seem contrived, and there's a lot of really great humor all throughout this episode that doesn't get in the way of it having a good point to drive home at the end.
And I think I'll give my rating last. I'll just talk about it a little bit more. So Grady's part is fantastic because, like you said, it bookends it without it being like really too tangled up, because I definitely think if they added like a whole subplot devoted to Grady, like if you think about what would he have done, he would have just been going through stores being turned down everywhere he went. So I think that you can definitely, like, that's not really something we need along with the episode, because if it was just that repeating over and over again,
would have been a lot of useless filler.
Yeah, pretty much. And it just would have been like, the episode would have probably been too long, so they would have had to probably cut out the conversation with Cheddar, which is like the best part. It would be horrible.
Travesty against Lost and Found.
What?
I said it would have been a travesty against Lost and Found.
It would. Even though I think the kind of comedy story, even though it's overused, like people, it's kind of the comedy kind of thing that goes with this story that's used a lot, because not specifically this story is used a lot with like gift exchanges, like sometimes it is, like in Big Bang Theory it's kind of there a teensy bit, but not enough that it'll be super cliche. It's pretty much just boils down to miscommunication between everyone. So it's kind of like an episode of a sitcom or something where everyone doesn't understand what they're trying to tell each other, so everything gets messed up but then sorted out in the end. But the characters are amazing in this episode. Eugene is such a big sweetheart. Every single time we talk about him in the Oddcast, he just moves higher up on my favorite characters list. I like talking about Eugene. He's not in my top 5 characters, but I don't know why, I just love ranting about him. And I think it's a pretty good episode. It's definitely not my favorite. Definitely not my favorite Christmas one, because there are still some things I don't like about it that much, carried on from my first initial impressions when I was 10. I can't really get into it. It's kind of like when you dislike something a teensy bit, but you don't really know why in the first place, if that makes sense.
I understand, especially when you're young. You're just going to have natural predispositions towards something one way or the other.
Like all my initial opinions, which I generally remember, so I'll probably be talking about them for these episodes when we review old episodes, are going to be way different from Devin's because there's a 2.5-year gap between us. So, yeah, I kind of look at everything in the eye of a child and Devin in the eye of a teenager pretty much, so.
So what's your final rating for this episode, Victoria? To close up, I can't believe we just spent almost an hour talking about a one-parter.
We talked about other stuff too.
Yeah.
We always say 3.5, like 3.25. 3.5, actually, yeah. Or 3. I don't know. 3 something. Somewhere in there.
3.5.
Yeah. It's like somewhere between like 2.5 to 3.5, somewhere in there.
3.5 is Victoria's rating.
That's not what I said.
Is there anything else you have to say? For you,
those who haven't listened to this episode, listen to it. It not only for the awesome Eugene and Tomness, then for at least the conversation with Cheddar, because that part is hilarious.
And I think that that's all we have for you this week to close this episode up after a very long time. So there is not going to be an episode this week. We had a certain headcanon when scheduled. But Victoria is not letting me do it because apparently it's a dumb headcanon and it doesn't make sense and
That's
such.
because it is.
Because so I'm not allowed to do it.
We
So
talked
there will
about
be
it
no
for a while,
episode
and we
for
decided
next
it was
week.
best if you didn't.
There'll be no episode for next week, and then we'll be resuming our Christmas reviews afterwards. I apologize.
Sorry, guys. I guess it'll just give us time to catch up on how behind we are. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So
get
that snarky look off your face, Devin.
Yeah. Until next time, thank you for joining us on our side of the YouTube. This has been Devin Francis.
And this has been Victoria.
And you've been watching The Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast.
Oddcast. Was I close?
No.
I knew I was late, just so you know.
Bye.
Bye.